In today's video, we are looking at Hong Kong's harbour through a set of slides taken around 1970. I guess they're probably taken by someone who was visiting Hong Kong as a tourist and had joined a guided tour for the day. In this first view, we're on Hong Kong Island near Aberdeen. We're looking across to Lam Island in the distance. We're quite close to the entrance to Aberdeen Harbour. And this little island in the foreground here, Magazine Island, it used to be the place where explosives were stored up until about 1908. That's where it gets its name from. A little bit further around the corner, we've got this view. We're looking at the breakwater at the entrance to Aberdeen Harbour, big typhoon shelter behind it. And then across the way, we've got the big power station here. Now at this point, it's pretty new. It started generating electricity in 1968. And it's currently being expanded. You can see one chimney's complete and then another chimney over here under construction still. This is Hong Kong Electric's third generation of power station. This replaced the previous one that's at North Point, and a little bit later on in turn this one will be replaced by the big new power station over at Lamma Island. And when that happens, then this site will become South Horizons. That's what it is today. Down in the foreground, you can see lots of food being dried, set out in the sunshine here. Probably some sort of seafood, I'd guess, just based on the number of fishing boats in the vicinity. We've reached our destination. We're coming off the bus, and this is our tour guide. Perhaps one of the viewers can recognize which company he worked for from the logo on his shirt here. Here's a better view, and it explains why we're here. So we're looking across the water towards Ap Lei Chau, that's in the background there, and we've got these two large vessels, both of which were floating restaurants, one on the left, one on the right. And if you're a tourist coming to Hong Kong around this time, you're pretty much guaranteed to go and have a meal on one of the floating restaurants here. Some of the older pictures we have of Aberdeen Harbour, say back into the 1950s, show several small floating restaurants. But over time, they consolidated into a smaller number of larger restaurants. At this point, the photo is showing three. You can see two here, one on the left and the one on the right. This is the one that we'll be going to for lunch today. A couple of ways to get there. You could take a motorboat. The Tai Pak Ferry is waiting here, but lots of the tourists preferred to go on the smaller boats, be rowed across, something like one of these. This is our captain for the day. Here we are. There's a close-up. And we're going to make our way past all of the other boats that are jam-packed into the harbour here. Quite a variety. Several more boats like the ones that we're on. Another one over here. Some smaller. These sampans with the roof on. These were used as accommodation. People would live on board these. And then some of the bigger junks in the background with the big masts up here. Here's a better view of that first floating restaurant. Unfortunately, though, its name is hidden behind the mast and this sign here, so I'm not sure what its name was. Round to the right, we've got the other two. Here's just make out part of its name, the Tai Pak. This is the one that we're going to. And over on the right was another one, the Sea Palace. You can see there's quite a convoy of us heading over there for lunch. At this point, we turn and look back towards the island. Down on the seafront, we've got one of the original buildings. This was built when the land was first reclaimed, but most of the old buildings are gone by this point, and they've all been replaced by these taller, newer buildings. Over on the left, we've got the Chinese permanent cemetery. It's one of the big landmarks of the area. And the fact that it's a permanent cemetery shows its age. In most modern cemeteries, burials are only temporary, and that the government asks you to, or requires you to dig up the burial after 6 years. But this one from the start of the 20th century, still a permanent cemetery. Boat in the foreground here looks to be on the school run, I'd guess. Not sure whether they're going to or coming from school. Perhaps boys who lived on Ap Lei Chau being taken across the water, or perhaps they live on some of the boats here in the harbour. Here's a better view of the cemetery and looking up to Mount Kellet up here. This is the Matilda Hospital up at the top. And from this picture, if you just look at the way that we are looking at the boats, we're looking down onto the boats here. We're up at a higher viewpoint. So I think we've arrived at our restaurant by this point, and that's confirmed in the next few slides. So these are the columns along the side of the Tai Pak restaurant. If we walk along to the far end, we get this view of the Sea Palace next door. Then it's down to business and the reason we're here, which is to have a seafood lunch. You can see your seafood is fished out using a net like this one or this one. You can't get fresher than that. A view of the inside. Unfortunately, we don't get to see what they were having for lunch that day. I was quite hoping to see what was on the menu. Here's the old Aberdeen police station up on the hill over on the left here. So I think we're probably heading back to shore after our lunch is over. The big launch that we're looking at here, well, if we look at the stern, we can see it's called the Sir Cecil Clementi. So it was named after Hong Kong's governor in the 1920s, which suggests a government connection. And indeed, the launch was built for the New Territories Administration. It would transport their officials out to villages, out to the islands, anywhere that you couldn't get to by road. Now, for a time, it had quite a different use. It was loaned out to the Hong Kong Marine Police, and that was at the time of the influx of Vietnamese refugees arriving by sea. But afterwards, it returned to its original role and a slower pace of life. Slightly different viewpoint, better view of the police station. It's not used as a police station anymore, but the building does still survive. And then it's back to dry land, where our smiling tour guide is waiting for us, along with the tour bus and a couple of hawkers here, hoping to sell you some souvenirs. Right, we'll get back on the bus and say farewell to Aberdeen, because our next sequence of photos are all taken on the north shore. And you might think that we've ended up in a car park, but if we look at the signs in the background, we can see ferry to Sham Shui Po, ferry to Mongkok, so we're actually at a ferry terminal. Remember, it's 1970, so the first tunnel across the harbour won't open until 1972. So at this point, if you want to cross the harbour, you'll be taking a ferry, and we can see one of the vehicle ferries in the background here. So this is what's going to be taking us across the harbour. Some of these ferries were double deck. This one is an example of a double deck, and that explains the ramp on the right. So that got the cars on and off the upper decks. Now we're on board the ferry, and we're just pulling away from the seawall down here. Up in the centre here, the big Circle A logo, that was the logo for the Star Industrial Company, which made, and indeed still makes, a range of plastic products, things like buckets and bowls, etc. Very popular around this time. Here it is again, Circle A, and here's the ferry terminal. This is where we left from. At this point, we've got two vehicular ferries berthed here. This one is one of the double deckers, and this one only carries cars on the lower deck. The terminal was in front of this square building here, and this is the old central fire station. And it's the site of the Hang Seng Bank today. Looking in the opposite direction towards Qing Yi, the harbour's busy with ships loading and unloading goods. Remember, we're around 1970 when container shipping starting to take off, but lots of the ships here are still using the older break bulk approach, where they unload smaller quantities of goods onto the waiting junks and barges. Here's the Manyong ferry heading in the opposite direction, this one a passenger only ferry. And then turning a little bit further around to the right, we're looking at Chim Sa Choi. Here's Star House, which is down at the tip of the peninsula. And then these piers and ships along here, these are the Kowloon Wharves. So in the previous video, when we were looking at the elephants being unloaded, that was all happening back about here. Now, a little update on those elephants. In the video, I said that they were in town with a circus. And I still think that's the most likely explanation, but it's not the only possible explanation. One of our regular contributors, Modzi, notes that the newspaper reports from the 1930s have articles about elephants being transshipped through Hong Kong. So they might have just been unloaded here so they could be reloaded onto another ship. Coming to the end of the ferry ride, the Jordan Road Ferry Terminal is just out of sight to the right here. And we're looking at these distinctive buildings, they're all part of the Ferry Point estate. 8 buildings in all, and each of them is the name Mun something building. The one under scaffolding in the background here is Mun Cheung building, and that was finished in 1970. The estate is still standing today, but reclamation here means that they're quite a distance inland now, so they don't look as striking as they used to. Our last 2 slides, and at first glance we've come back full circle to Aberdeen again, but a couple of things don't look quite right. First of all, the Tai Pak restaurant seems a lot smaller than the one we saw before. And the second view of it, well, there's a very high mountain in the background. Looks much too high for Aberdeen. And the water in the foreground looks too shallow for Aberdeen. The explanation is that we are looking at the Tai Pak restaurant, but an older version. So this one started out life in Aberdeen Harbour, but as business grew, the boat was replaced with the larger restaurant that we saw earlier. Then, rather than send this old restaurant off to be scrapped, it was towed to a new home here in Castle Peak Bay. So that's Castle Peak in the background there. That's our last slide, but if you'd like more photos and stories of Hong Kong's harbour, that's the theme of my 3rd book, Volume 3 of Old Hong Kong Photos and the Tales They Tell. I'll put a link to more information about that and about all the topics we've covered in the description below. Well, thank you for watching, and as this is the last video before Christmas, let me also wish you a happy time over the holidays.